Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. We're here with CEO of Tsogo Sun Hotels, Marcel van Olak, and we're going to be talking about how COVID has affected the hospitality industry both here in South Africa and throughout the African continent. Thanks so much for joining us today, Marcel. So, I think we're all aware that it's been a very tough year for everybody in the hospitality industry, including all hotels. Maybe we could start by talking about where Tsogo is at this point in time, and particularly about how rates within the hotel and hospitality industry have been affected by COVID. Like, have we seen increases, decreases, or are rates staying relatively the same to 2019 levels?
So, it's obviously the worst impact on the industry outside of like a world war or something like that. So never in the history, Tsogo is from the Southern Sunday is 50 years old, 51 years old, and it's never ever had to close the entire portfolio in one go. All the traumas over half a century, there was never anything like this. So obviously in the hard lockdown period, we closed 112 hotels. We then opened a few of them for quarantine, and basically very little happened for 3 months. And then you started to get a hint of a recovery in the industry. I think in June last year, we sold 10,000 room nights, and we normally sell about 250 to 270,000 room nights a month. So at 10, you're hardly ticking the box at all. But that started to increase, and we jumped to 20 and 30 and 60 and 80. And so there was a reasonably good recovery. By November, we were pretty close to, I think, 100,000. December was 113,000. So the world was coming right. And then the second wave came. December was fortunately in the bag. We didn't see mass cancellations, but we saw a definite slowdown in pickup. So we would have done, we think, maybe about 20% better if there hadn't been a second wave. But then January just went right back to like a 50,000 room night mark. And February was 67, and March we probably on, we don't know, we think we'll do 90 or 100 or so. But you clearly still well below where we would normally trade at the 250,000, call it a round number mark. So we have, I think, 85 of our 112 hotels open. So most of the portfolio is open, but an open hotel is not trading like it normally should. It's still running on skeleton staff. It's probably doing between 10 and 30% occupancy. If it's below 10, it's probably worth closing it. Some of the budget hotels, there's almost no difference in cost between open and closing the hotel. But all of that just describes an industry that's obviously very deeply in trauma. There is a good sign of momentum at the moment. So the pent-up demand for travel is there, but the volumes aren't there because you're missing two big components of the industry. And this is a long way to get to your answer about pricing, but it's important background. The one is there's no international visitation. So there are virtually no airlines flying, zero visitors. Cape Town on a normal day has 20 or 30,000 foreign visitors floating around, filling restaurants, like there's zero. And the corporates are still closed. So if you go through Sandton at 8 o'clock in the morning, there is no traffic. All those big skyscraper buildings are empty. And without those markets, hotels cannot function at any sort of normal level. The business you're getting is a little bit of corporate travel where people have to, some government travel because government has to move to function, and leisure. So if you don't have leisure product, then you really can't tap into the one market that does exist. So our Arabellas and our Mount Graces and our Beverly Hills and so on are full over the weekends, and then it drifts off during the week. What all of that means is pricing is in the first answer, it's the same as last year, which may sound surprising, but what's happening is you're not getting any yielding opportunities. So normally you would have a set of what we call bar levels, best available rate, from level 1, which is your lowest rate when you've got low demand, all the way up to level 9, which is your peak event rate. Let's say you've got a World Cup going on, or a British and Irish Lions tour or something where you're charging your maximum rates. And what's happening is you're never moving up that scale. It's very seldom that you're charging into bar level 2 or 3 or 4 because it just never gets that peak level of demand. There might be some key leisure properties that are full on a Friday and Saturday night where you can up the price a little bit, but it's quite sensitive because there's not a hell of a lot of demand out there. So quite quickly, if you push the price too far, you'll just scare people off, and you don't want to be price gouging. So there is an element of discounting and competition for business that are around, but we're not seeing massive discounting on prices. What we're seeing is no yielding opportunity. And that means by the time you get to a year later, your average rate achieved would have been lower because you never got to charge those peak event rates. I'd say the the 2020 year is a total write-off for any sort of pricing, and 2021, the first half is going to be the same. And by the second half, if we are into some sort of normal travel of corporates, then you'll start getting into your normal pricing decisions, how you price between peak and off-peak periods and so on. But we're a good 6 months away from that.
So you're describing a situation that is completely unsustainable. What do we need to do to reopen things and to get the industry functioning properly again?
So the regulations that hits the industry the hardest is curfew and alcohol ban. And even if you don't have those, a third wave is a very real risk, because we saw in the second wave was much worse than the first, and there was very real fear amongst people. People didn't want to travel. They were locking themselves down, even if government didn't lock them down. So we've got to hopefully have a very small or no third wave, and definitely avoid a fourth wave at all costs. And in that scenario, whilst just changing the curfew and banning alcohol seems like minimal restrictions on the country as a whole compared to what government did in the first hard lockdown, it does affect the tourism industry dramatically. It's not just that we make money out of selling a bottle of wine, but I can't sell you a weekend at Mount Grace if you can't have wine with your supper or have a beer at the pool. I lose the room revenue, the breakfast revenue, the lunch, the spa treatments. I lose everything because people just go, there's a wave, I'm nervous, and why would I bother traveling? And we saw this in the luxury bush lodges, for example. The bush is out there, everything's great, but you don't really want to stop at 5 o'clock for your in the bush gin and tonic if you can't have gin and tonic, and people just stay away. So those curfews hit our travel industry disproportionately hard. If there isn't a meaningful third wave and there isn't a change in regulations, I think the recovery the momentum we've got at the moment will actually carry on quite strongly. There is that pent-up demand for travel. Corporates are starting to travel outside of their norm, but they just have to move. They have to get to their areas where their businesses are. So there's a little bit of that travel. And then if your international borders open and your flights resume, so we saw yesterday, I think Lufthansa said they're starting from the end of March back into Cape Town and so on, then you'll start getting that momentum through. But in reality, I think it's next summer, we've got to get through the winter. Next summer, we should have an element of normality back.
Okay, so you've mentioned Mount Grace, and this is quite a new property for Tsogo to take on. So sort of looking back over reports, I see that you took over 3 Marriott properties, the Mount Grace, the Magaliesburg, the Edward in Durban, and the Protea Hotel Hazyview. So why did you make that decision to do that in the middle of lockdown, sort of mid-2020, when everybody else was sort of steering clear of hospitality?
So we've actually taken over 5 Marriott properties, because we've also taken Arabella in the Cape and the Marine in Port Elizabeth. These are all properties we own. So when we bought the hospitality fund a number of years ago, it came with several hotels that were operated by Protea, which Marriott subsequently bought Protea, and they had leases over those properties. When it came to the lockdown scenario, Marriott walked away from the leases, and they put out an announcement that these properties are permanently closed, which is garbage, because we own them, and if they don't want to lease them, we'll run them ourselves. So it wasn't us going out and chasing a new property, it was Marriott walking away from a lease that they had, and therefore we said, great, we'll put them back into our portfolio, and that's why we've taken 5 back from them. But we actually own the properties because we bought the whole hospitality fund, and that's how we got into those.
Okay, very interesting, and it's good to hear that they are at least sort of open and doing well during weekends, as you mentioned, for Mount Grace. So let's talk about Africa. I know Tsogo has invested quite heavily up through Africa in the last few years, particularly Mozambique, Nigeria. We know a lot about how lockdown has affected the South African industry, but how has Africa fared, and how are hotels doing up there sort of throughout the rest of the continent?
So Africa is a collection of very different countries. And if I run through our portfolio, Seychelles, which is off the coast of Africa, has been pretty much shut completely. It started to open to the world now, excluding South Africa, because they're scared of the SA variant, which is bad PR for us, but it still has very, very low levels of travel. So Seychelles is effectively still closed. The places like Zambia are very reliant on travel from South Africa. So they have fared exactly like we have in South Africa, largely being closed, very low volumes. They haven't had the same regulatory restrictions on them, but there's no activity in Zambia because South Africans aren't traveling, which is their closest trading partner. Then you've got our two biggest properties is Nigeria and Mozambique. And interestingly, they both traded virtually all the way through. We never closed the Southern Sun Mozambique at all. We closed the Stay Easy property that we have up the road because we could just merchandise the business in. But Southern Sun Maputo is pretty much traded the whole way through and run at around about 40–50% occupancy. So it's actually done reasonably well. It was a little bit advantageous that everybody else in town closed. So you then are the only hotel in town. But there's a lot of this oil and gas business that's coming through there, which obviously the oil and gas is up north, but the commercial operations of that, the companies that are involved in that sort of business have to come through Maputo. So Maputo's actually done quite well. It's managed to keep afloat and pay its way. And Lagos, we had a very small lockdown where they closed it. But if you remember, Nigeria, when it had the Ebola outbreak, didn't lock down. So they're pretty hardy up there. And Nigeria has traded all the way through. And what we've got in Nigeria is quite a strong local following. So the Southern Sun Ikoi in Lagos does very well on the weekends. It's like the place in town for your Sunday lunches and buffets and staycations within the city of Lagos. So we survived, even though there was very little international business moving through Lagos, we survived on local travel, which kept that hotel going. And we had to implement much of the same type of layoffs and cost-cutting measures and so on that we've done in the rest of the group, but these hotels were able to generate enough revenue to look after themselves. So they're interesting markets in their own. And I think Lagos now, with the oil price suddenly moving from 40 up to the 60s, I think we'll start seeing a lot more activity because they are so dependent on what oil revenues are happening in the country. So those two countries I'm pretty optimistic on. Tanzania has been nothing short of a mess. It's a difficult country before COVID kicked in. So it basically, we closed and it's going to stay closed for a while. But our big operations are Lagos and Maputo, and they're washing their face.
Great. Well, Marcel, thank you so much for a very insightful update. It was lovely to connect with you. And yeah, please keep us updated with all the movement. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much.